Meeting is being live streamed. Hello and good afternoon to everybody, or good morning, depending on what time zone you're in. I'm Ann Haynes, and I'm president and CEO of DreamSpring, a nonprofit microfinance organization based in Albuquerque and serving 27 states around the country. As we get started in this session, I want to note a few things for all of you who are streaming into this. First, that this webinar is being recorded, and I just want to provide a few housekeeping tips. On the top right-hand side of your screen, you'll see icons for the chat and question and answer features. We encourage you to use the chat feature to comment, introduce yourselves, and interact with other participants throughout the session. The next is to please feel free to submit questions using the question and answer box throughout the program as they occur to you. The next is that we will address audience questions immediately following the session in an interactive Zoom room, and that link is going to be separate than this link. And in that Zoom discussion room, each participant will be able to use their video and audio to interact with the panelists and other attendees. So those are some of the housekeeping items. And with that, I am going to go ahead and begin and welcome each of you to a session really focused on fraud and focused on cyber attacks, the impact on CDFIs. CDFIs are tackling the issue of suspicious activity, having to revamp external messaging to streamline internal processes for risk mitigation. We're looking forward to this being a very dynamic discussion that hopefully will raise important questions about our industry and offer some innovative solutions for combating suspicious activity and allowing all of us to better serve our target communities. And with that, I'll once again introduce myself, and I will introduce everybody who is on the screen with you at the moment who are going to be panelists. And then we'll move right into a question and dialogue with the panelists that you see before you. So with me is Francisco Lopez, if you can raise your hand, who's our Chief Operations and Innovation Officer for DreamSpring. We have Meta Smith, who is our Chief Lending and Client Experience Officer. We have Jessica Wilson, who is our Fraud Analyst. And we have Vignesh Kadva, who's our Product and Technology Lead. So with that, we are very excited to continue and begin the question and answer dialogue with me as the moderator and our panelists. And then again, after about 45 minutes, we'll move into a question and answer session on a different link. So with that, I want to begin by setting the stage for all of you in the audience. Meta and Francisco, tell us what fraudulent activity you've seen recently and how it's happened and how it is happening more often than in the past.
I'll start, Francisco, jump in as you like. So as the awareness of DreamSpring has grown online, we've definitely seen an increase in fraudulent activity, and it takes a variety of forms. The things that we're seeing on a daily basis is an increased volume of fraudulent application that involves actors stealing identities from legitimate people and using those identities to complete a small business application in hopes of gaining funding in a fraudulent way. Other times, there are folks who are building synthetic identities in order to complete those small business applications in hopes of getting fraudulent funds. Another way that we've seen fraudulent activity grow in recent months is folks representing themselves as DreamSpring staff members to external parties, either in hopes of having them apply for a loan through DreamSpring, but they are not a DreamSpring staff member, or apply for a job through DreamSpring, attempted to become a DreamSpring employee. And during that process, those folks who pretend to be DreamSpring staff members gather information of folks who are legitimately trying to apply for a loan or apply for a job, and then stealing identity once again. Another way we've seen fraudulent activity is through simple things like text messages. For example, we've seen text messages from executive and leadership team members to other leadership and team members asking for us to go buy gift cards or to change the bank account information where our direct deposits for payroll go. And just because of a heightened awareness across the team, we've been able to catch that those are fraudulent texts and emails. But it's definitely ran the spectrum, not just in applications, but through a variety of different methods. Francisco, what have I forgot?
No, thank you for that, Meta. I think you covered the whole gamut. I think that it definitely has increased, and we're not the only victims or organizations that are exposed to this. This is happening across the board. If you are engaging in some form or manner online with potential borrowers, there is always the risk of basically having bad actors try to go through the door and basically commit fraud. So I think that everything that Meta explained is right on the spot. The only thing I would add is that the different type of effort that fraudulent actors engage in changes through time. So it could be that they try through a very engineered way that you can very easily identify there's something going on, because you see either a big shift in applications or you start to see a big shift in declines in ID verifications, et cetera. But then there's what's called ambient fraud, which is trickling in and little by little. And when they're using stolen identities, that is harder to catch. So human interaction and effort is also very valuable in this process.
Great, thank you both. Jessica, I want to ask you to pick up on something Francisco just said and share with us really what you, and then Meta, if you can follow up on this, identified initially were characteristics that led us to think that there were fraudulent applicants or fraud in the system, and how that detection has evolved, what the process looked like, what it looks like now, and what we've learned through that process. Jessica?
Well, I'm happy to say that we've learned a lot, and it's evolved even over, I believe, 6 to 7 months of my time being a dedicated fraud analyst. I'm proud of where we've come from, but we started out with an influx of applications, and then we saw that a lot of them were duplicated, a lot of them had same names, different information, and that's what highlighted our senses to the fact that we were now on the radar of these bad actors, and we needed to be more dedicated to verifying who we were working with so that we could actually help valid entrepreneurs succeed. So over time, we went from just evaluating disbursements and trying to review applications to now we are working with the technology that we have in-house to start at the beginning of those application processes to review those applications and make sure that our loan officers are actually working with the right folks and we're getting funds in the right folks' hands.
I'll just add a little bit of more nuanced detail and say at the beginning, a lot of our fraud review involved a visual inspection from staff members and comparing IDs to photos that were taken, or visually inspecting bank statements to see, does this font look like the normal font this bank uses on all their bank statements? Is any of the column shifted? Does it look edited? And we're moving from that visual inspection that's very open to human error to a more digital review using third-party software to see, has this PDF been edited? And that's a trigger for us to know, okay, this is a edited PDF, so likely a fraudulent actor, or using software to compare a picture on an ID to a selfie that's taken. And so I think leaning into the technology to more quickly review and less reliant on human error when it comes to looking at documents. The other thing that we've added is how we interact with these applicants and the questions that we're asking at the time. Just trying to ferret out, is this a legitimate person, or is this someone who's stolen an ID in order to gain access to fraudulent loan funds?
To piggyback off of what Meta just said, and that's absolutely correct. Another form of fraud, and as Francisco said, it's very ambient, is we deal with business owners and entrepreneurs. And because we provide business loans with a personal guarantee, a lot of these folks learned that they could apply and they don't have businesses as well. So it's not just taking advantage of someone else's identification or taking a loan out without the intention of repaying it, but also fabricating businesses and other information just to get access to those capital funds.
Jessica, I want to pick up on what you just said and comment that for community development financial institutions, fraud is already having a significant impact because potentially it takes money out of a system of recycling dollars in a community. So there's a multiplier, amplified effect from being able to put dollars into the hands of entrepreneurs, and as they pay back, have that continue to cycle. There's a real cost to an institution or an entity, no matter what size, when there is fraud involved. Probably some of you took note in the fact that Jessica here on our panel is our fraud analyst. We at DreamSpring have dedicated resources in this area. And we pulled Jessica from being on the lending team. She's absolutely phenomenal, to utilizing some of her experience in the past as a fraud analyst, specifically in this area. But I think that's another example of how fraud really does and can and will impact a community development organization. As a CDFI, we, and probably most of you who are streaming with us, have a lot of stakeholders. Meta, and then followed by Francisco, I'd love to have you both talk about how have we communicated with some of our stakeholders as we've experienced fraud in terms of some of the fraud mitigants, and how has this impacted our customer service?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So first of all, we've spent a lot of time training our internal team. So all of our staff has gone through many anti-fraud trainings, not just the lenders who are working directly with applicants, but the entire staff, because of phishing emails and other ways that folks are trying to get into the system in order to obtain access to fraudulent funds. So lots of training with the internal team on how to identify fraud, and also the different applications we've put into place, different software and platforms to prevent fraud. So they're all aware of those systems that we're using to prevent fraud. When it comes to applicants and clients, it's a little bit more nuanced communication, but there's definitely a lot of communication that's happening as well. There's a lot of education, because we do have people who call us after the fact saying, why are you pulling my credit? I don't know anything about this loan application. And so needing to do education with folks who've had their ID stolen around, what can they do to protect themselves as much as possible at this point? Also with legitimate applicants, having to kind of walk them through some of these new technologies we've implemented to prevent fraud that do take a little bit more sophisticated use of technology in order to navigate through that process. And so there's a lot more technical assistance that's happening with applicants, and also having to explain why did we put this new barrier into the process, really to protect them and to protect DreamSpring and our ability to help them by preventing fraud from getting into the system. The more applications that are fraudulent that we have to weed through prevents us from using our time as much as we want to with the legitimate applicants. Same thing with our funding. The more funding that goes to these fraudulent actors, the less funds we have to support the legitimate folks that we really want to help in their small business journey. Francisco, do you want to talk a little bit about our communications externally?
Thank you, Mena. Yes, of course. So to add to that, we in just not a regular basis, but when we start to see trends in potential fraud in our pipeline, we are very mindful of the way we're communicating, not only internally but externally as well, through the different channels, social media, email to our client base, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to be very mindful of what we message, because we don't want to give out too much information either, because fraudulent actors can then pick up on that based on what we are doing to mitigate for the risk of fraud. So communication is key. It is important. And if it means that there will be delays in our process, we need to communicate that as well. So this is an ongoing process. Our marketing and communications team have set up information on our website, on social media, to help potential clients and entrepreneurs that are looking for access to capital, just to be aware of the risks and dangers that are out there. And we take the opportunity to try to educate our client base and people who interact with us.
Francisco, could you continue with what you were just talking about, and also tell us about how we're working with third parties, partners, vendors, and internal teams in our attempt to address fraud? And then also specifically, what internal teams at DreamSpring have been impacted by attempted fraudulent attacks, and what advice you have for organizations trying to navigate fraud mitigation?
Thank you for that, Anne. So just to give a little bit of context, DreamSpring operates in 27 states. We have, you could say, physical loan officers and community engagement officers in around 5 to 6 states. So the rest of the engagement that we have in our path to scale our impact is mostly engaging with clients in a virtual through a virtual platform, where we try to increase and input a hybrid form of interaction, where they interact through our platform, and if they need to interact with loan officer or with a customer success officer, that they are able to do so. So putting that into context, through the last probably 2 to 3 years, we've enhanced our lending platform and have added features that enable us to protect ourselves from fraud attempts. That means that we work with vendors that help us automate the ID verification process where it applies. It allows us to also verify documents that we are receiving to try to weed out fraudulent actors that are trying to put that through the system. And then we are also working to try to find ways to improve our underwriting process, which in the same time helps us continue to identify fraud through the application process. And additional to that, we work with vendors that help us link clients' bank accounts directly, which also helps through that process. So there are a lot of tools out there. It's a complete industry, and you need to, if you are going to go down the path of trying to lend digitally or engage digitally with entrepreneurs, you need to start thinking about those type of enhancements to the process, because doing it manually 100% takes a lot of resources and time. Internally, it has affected whenever we've had fraudulent events or attempts, it affects our whole pipeline, our whole process. It affects our loan officers, it affects our underwriters, it affects our client success team, just across the board. It puts everyone in an uneasy situation. And it takes a lot of internal communication and work to make sure that everything is stabilized and that we continue to do our work. The work that Jessica does along with our compliance team is amazing, as they are continuously monitoring and provide a lot of feedback to our teams to try to minimize the impact whenever we are able to identify fraud.
Great. Thank you, Francisco. Vignesh, I'd love to have you weigh in on that question of what would you advise other community development financial institutions, community development organizations about how to navigate both through the potential for fraud or fraudulent activity, and how you see technology playing a role, plus how you've really created opportunities through DreamSpring's technology to try to preemptively address some of the potential fraudulent activity.
Thanks for that question, Anne. In terms of advice, I would say it is important to have a team dedicated to fraud analysis. It is a long process. There are multiple attack vectors and they continuously keep updating. So it's necessary to have at least a team dedicated to this. And it's also important to document known fraudulent attacks, because that provides a set of resources that the team can reference. It's also very valuable training material. And I would typically say it is a very huge set of actors who are trying to attack and trying to break and innovate and find new ways to get into the system. So typically, given our limited time and resources, we should try to focus on attacks that are easier to detect, but would have a higher impact in terms of stopping it. And finally, it is a continuous process. We should have systems in place to monitor our current attack vectors, identify new attack vectors, keep ourselves updated with the latest trends in this industry. In terms of the impact of technology and the part it's played in our organization, tech has played a significant part in stopping both large-scale denial of service attacks for our staff and our clients, and also ambient and synthetic fraud attempts. So typically what we do is we try to focus on the client data and we try to verify them in as much as an automated manner. We flag them for manual review only when the technology cannot handle it, or we need a second set of eyes on this to review it further. So the data we usually collect, we try to ascertain, is the client really who they claim to be? So we verify in a more automated manner. Does the phone number belong to the client? The email belong to the client? The addresses, the SSN, do they match up with the addresses and everything? So we work with multiple vendors and build our own internal systems for identity verification, where the clients can upload their selfie or take a selfie and a picture of any form of ID. We try to see if that's the same person. We see if they are using devices which are known and have been flagged by other vendors in the past. So also we use automated PII verification, and also try to evaluate bank accounts so that we know that they haven't been linked with known fraudulent activity. And once we do that, we actively scan apps for known fraudulent activity. If we detect any kind of threats, then we usually flag it for review to the fraud analysis team. And this is a continuous changing process, and we need to update it. Our goal is always to have technology manage most of the work and try to be proactive and flag it for manual review only when necessary. And we continuously update our systems to catch newer attack vectors and keep our systems updated with all the newer threats that we are facing. Our teams both the technology team in tandem with the fraud analysis team, we look into various data points almost every week and try to implement fraud mitigation measures. We also continuously monitor the effectiveness of our current automated measures to detect and prevent fraud, reevaluate those continuously and see how we need to update them or make them more effective. We also leverage reports and best practices from established vendors and partners in the industry. So it's a three-pronged approach. We continuously update our systems. We are on the lookout for newer attack vectors and newer fraud attempts. And at the same time, we try to incorporate various measures and best practices from the industry.
Great, Vignesh, thank you so much for that. We have instituted a number of training programs at DreamSpring for the entire team because various attempts, fraudulent attempts to penetrate an organization in any number of different ways are abundant, regardless of the size of an organization. Francisco and then Meta, in addition to fraudulent applications, organizations of any size that have any kind of digital presence are also vulnerable to spoofing, impersonation, cyber attacks via email systems or third-party sites, websites, other online platforms. Talk about how we are trying to address this at DreamSpring and policies that we're creating to try to prevent and address future attacks in kind of a 360-degree way.
Thank you for that. And so yes, I mean, everything that you just laid out. I mean, we've seen it all. You know? We've seen it on our social media sites. We've seen it through email. We've seen it through just any channel that we have available. We've seen some sort of phishing and/or fraud attempts. And what our team has continuously been doing is a number of things. One, we continuously monitor our different channels to try to identify any activity that does not make sense. We try to put, you could say, tags and labels on authentic communications that we provide so that either our borrowers, our entrepreneurs, or our internal team members can recognize when it is a legitimate message that they are receiving. We work with vendors that help us to increase the legitimacy of the channels that we are putting out there to mitigate the risk of allowing fraudulent actors to access our websites or to continue to impersonate DreamSpring personnel or DreamSpring's website or any of the communication channels that we have. So on top of that, we also have increased the number of partners that we work so that partners that are aligned to our target markets, that are very aligned to our mission, that work with entrepreneurs and small businesses that require capital access, we work with those partners to access and to acquire those type of entrepreneurs so that we can provide capital access. And by doing that, we also minimize the risk of potential actors going through that process because there are more than one or two different points of verification or vetting through the partnerships that makes it more difficult for fraudulent actors to participate and to be vulnerable. No? But still, I think that everything that we continue to do, we need to continue to do better each and every time because of all the different elements associated to trying to prevent fraud. No?
What would you add to that? And thanks so much, Francisco.
Yeah, I would say the other thing that has been incredibly helpful for us in catching fraud and preventing fraud is universal awareness across the team. So Jessica and other team members who are really focused on preventing fraud are very, very good at giving concrete examples to the entire staff of what's happening and what's key identifiers or indicators of fraud, not just within applications, but in how emails are composed, language that is used. So that awareness across all of our stakeholders and is a key preventative measure. If we had this very siloed, I think we wouldn't be nearly as good at preventing fraud. But the fact that we are trying to raise awareness across the staff and other key stakeholders has been really critical in us being successful in preventing as much fraud as possible from getting through into our pipeline or into emails or in the text messages and gift card purchases and the other examples that have been raised here.
Great. Thanks for that, Meta. You know, it's very interesting because over the years that I've been involved in the community development industry and specifically microlending, I've just been absolutely amazed by the evolving ingenuity of dishonest attempts to either gain access to information, to get funding in different ways. Years and years ago, I remember a colleague in the CDFI industry mentioning that there was an applicant for a business, and this was a time when many of us did site visits on all applications for funding for a small business loan, who borrowed a friend's business to make it seem like his own to be able to be eligible during the site visit for consideration of a loan. And I think about how far we've come because as our industry, the community development industry, continues to evolve, so does the ingenuity of practices. And you may be wondering, why at DreamSpring are we spending, this time and focus sharing some of our learnings along the way? It is because it is an epidemic and it is touching all of us one way or another, and therefore it becomes a greater barrier to all of us as organizations committed to serving the target populations that we're so committed to, from being able to do that more efficiently, more effectively at greater scale. And so it's very important that all of us in the industry look at these things and think about, how can we continue to learn from each other so that we're tearing down barriers to access for our clients, as opposed to finding ourselves in a position of increasing barriers to access. I'm going to do a round robin now. And Meta, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to ask each of you the same question. In the CDFI industry, there are very small organizations, there are much larger organizations, there are ones that outsource technology, there are ones that have in-house platforms. What advice would you give to the audience on how to prepare and be preemptive in dealing with fraud? Pardon me.
Thanks, Anne. So I think there is nothing better than listening to your own antenna when it comes to preventing fraud. And it's hard to listen to your antenna if you're just reading something on a screen or on a piece of paper. So that conversation that you're having with a person, if it's someone texting you to buy gift cards, picking up the phone to call, and you find out, oh, it's not my CEO who's actually texting me. Or if it's an applicant who's filled out an application and you pick up the phone and you say, tell me more about your business, and there's a lot of stuttering and halting, or they can't tell you the last 4 digits of their social security number without ruffling through papers, or they don't know the address off the top of their head, that's another indicator that someone is committing fraud. And so there's nothing like the antenna that you have. I also encourage folks to use your inner detective. This is what I tell lenders as well. Go online. There's nothing like stalking people Google or Facebook or LinkedIn to find out, do they have a business? You can find out so much on the internet these days. That can really indicate, is this just a built-up profile on Instagram, or is this a long-standing profile that's been around for a real long time? They have followers who've been to their business and photos of their friends and family eating their donuts, that sort of thing. One other thing I want to flag as you're thinking about building up your fraud prevention process, and this is from experience working on the client service side, is there is a really delicate balance in preventing fraud and working with some of our small business owners who are very less technologically sophisticated than others. We find that folks who aren't comfortable sharing a lot of information online can look a lot like a fraudulent actor because they're trying to circumvent some of the things we've put in place to prevent fraud, simply because they're not comfortable sharing so much information online. And so that is a delicate balance as you're putting in your fraud prevention process, to think about those applicants who don't want to share information online, don't have a cell phone, are more comfortable interacting over paper or face-to-face with their loan officer. And is there some kind of way to bypass the system for those folks so that they can still get access to funding without being stopped in the process by your anti-fraud prevention measures?
That's great, Meta. Thank you. Vignesh, any words of advice? Same question.
Yeah. So I think it's important for institutions to leverage technology as much as possible, and it can help in multiple ways. So I think it's important to do due diligence on the financial records that clients submit, whether tax returns or any form of other financial records. Has it been tampered with? So there is technology now that can help us with that. And of course, all these types of identity verification measures and PII verification measures, account verification measures. I think it's important to especially look at the places where client data is involved. So to protect legitimate clients and also make sure our capital goes into the right hands as much as possible. And up to that, I think it's also important to have a good repository of fraud and also educate the staff. As much as we share information and train them, we are empowering more people to detect fraud and to help us build stronger systems as a whole, as a team. And leverage technology again for more automated and active, proactive fraud detection, and leverage it with our own internal knowledge and our knowledge base of the team and the staff and industry veterans. So it would be a combination of all of that.
Excellent, Vignesh. Thank you. Same question, Francisco. And then Jessica, we're going to close with you, our fraud analyst.
I'll keep it short. I think I would add to all of this, and something that we didn't really address during this conversation. So one thing is fraudulent attempts through the lending process, right? I think we focused a lot on that. But there's also cyber threats of fraudulent actors that want to probably have access to your database and your client's information. And depending on how you're set up with your platform, if it's either an external provider or it's your own software, or if you don't have a software, but you have information, stored somewhere, if it's on a server or a bunch of servers, or if it's in the cloud, depending on where you are, you also need to think about having a vendor that can help you constantly be monitoring and making sure that you have the defenses needed to protect the data that you have from your borrowers in particular, and the organization's data, employee data, bank data, et cetera, et cetera. That is also something that is very, very important to include. And I think the reason I mentioned this and bring this up is because I think we need to look at cyber threats from a very holistic point of view. and all of the different angles as to where you can be vulnerable to a cyber attack, be it an fraud attempt to get money, right, through a fake loan or through a loan via fake identity, or to steal information that you have stored that is very sensitive, especially when you're talking about your borrower's information. So the best advice is to think of it as a strategy as you think about your lending strategy, as you think about your budget, everything, it has to be included in your annual planning and your day-to-day operations.
Thanks so much, Francisco. And then Jessica, the same question. What advice would you have for anybody out there that might be watching this on how to best build and develop their fraud prevention program?
Well, everyone who spoke so far is hit the nail right on the head as far as preventing fraud, reviewing fraud, circumventing fraud. First thing I would recommend is know your customer. So, you know, we've got this online community now where we're not in person as much anymore, and we're not touching base, and we're not connecting on a human level, if you will. So that means we have to take extra steps to verify who we're working with, who we're dealing with through the internet. So making sure that that personal identifying information matches and makes sense for who you're talking to, who you're dealing with. If you're helping folks with businesses, you know, the type of business makes sense for the person that you're working with. So just pay attention to little details. As you know, Meta said, your antenna is your radar. I tell my teams here, go with your gut. If you get a gut feeling, follow it. Follow the information that is in front of you. So that's number one. Number two is depend and lean into your team. No one person knows anything about everything. So we definitely need each other. Everyone has a different perspective, different experiences, different backgrounds. So lean into your team, lean into their knowledge, their experiences. Be humble and accept help when it's necessary, so that, you know, you're doing the best thing for yourself as well as the folks you're trying to serve. And last but not least, just be mindful of the effort these folks, these bad actors, the people committing fraud are putting in. Here at DreamSpring, we have an incredible team of people who wake up every day trying to help others. These fraudulent actors, or people that are committing fraud, wake up every day with the intent of defrauding good people. And that is their full-time job. So we can't catch everything, but if we work together and pay attention to what we're doing and be diligent about who we're working with and what we're doing for them, we can definitely stop a lot of it altogether. And that means not just leaning into the folks you work with in your own companies, but doing things like this where we share information to help each other going forward.
That was wonderful, Jessica. Thank you so much for that. And thanks to all of you on the panel for the great information. For those of you who are tuning in live, we all hope that this has been helpful for you. We're here as a resource. If you want to tap into any of our learnings, feel free to contact us at DreamSpring. Want to let you know as well that if you are interested in joining us in the interactive Zoom room for question and answers and further conversation, you can access the Zoom room for that next question and answer and interactive session by clicking the Join the Interactive Discussion Group link, which should be at the bottom of this page below the session description. And it'll take a minute or so for all of us on screen to switch over to that. So just bear with us for a moment. We hope you do join us, because we'd love to have that interactive session, answer any questions you have. And if you're not able to join us in the discussion room, we do hope you'll be back for the closing plenary for this whole gathering that OFN has put together, which is at 4:30 Eastern time. So with that, thank you all so much. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to all of you who are streaming in, and hopefully we'll see you all in about a minute. Take care.